Hello, and welcome to the Lightworker Diaries, a space for reflection, truth-telling, and soulful remembering. My name is Tiffany, and I am a truth teller, a mystic, and a mirror. These are transmissions from my heart to yours, an archive of channeled wisdom, lived stories, and the real work of becoming. May something in here stir something in you. Hello, my friend. I had something happen for me yesterday that I have not been able to stop thinking about it. And it went as far as a research rabbit hole this morning, and I just had to share it with you. I want to talk about the impact of energetics on the foods and beverages we consume. And yeah, I know this is way different than what I've been talking about, but it is so real. And as a highly sensitive person, which I'm guessing you could be too, I think you're really going to relate to this. So, yesterday, I woke up early, as I always do. But the thing that was unique is my intuition said, let's go to the coast. So before I even had my cup of coffee, which you know is my morning ritual, I got ready and I was in my car heading to the coast. And I went to a place that's a little bit further than I normally go. And as I was driving into town, I saw this little coffee shop that I have tried to go to several times, and it was always closed. And the door was open. And there was a parking spot right out front. And I thought to myself, this is the moment. Clearly, I was meant to be right here, right now. This is amazing. So I pull over, walk inside, and I believe, owner, or at least the person working there at the time, was in the back, and she's like, I'll be right with you. I said, great, because I'm, taking in the sights, right? It's this very cute, little bit French bistro-ish coffee shop / wine bar. And I was like, oh man, the vibe here is super cute. And I could see myself coming with Dave and having a glass of wine and sitting on the porch. Like, it was checking a lot of boxes. So she comes around and she's like, hello, welcome. What can I get you for this morning? And I order my coffee and I notice they have a little pastry thing. Don't know the word for that. Case. Maybe I need another cup of coffee. I noticed the pastry case has croissants. And when I travel, croissants are like my treat that I only have on the road. And so I said, I will take a croissant as well. And I said, I'm so glad that you were open because I've been by several times and you've always been closed. So I'm really glad I'm finally getting a chance to be here. And she looked at me and she's like, really? She's like, our goal is to be open 7 days a week and we open at 8 a.m. What time are you usually here? And I was like, well, I live a ways away. And so I don't really remember, but it could have been a holiday. It could have been a weekend. And she's like, well, we're supposed to be open 7 days a week starting at 8 a.m. And I was like, well, lovely. Hopefully that means I can come back another time. And she's like, well, what brings you out here? And I said that once a week, I like to take myself someplace new and work for the day. So I love coffee shops because I can kind of, sit and be in a space for a little while. And so today I'm here and I'm really excited to be here. Place was empty. I was like, this is great. So she's like, okay, I pay for my breakfast. And then I say, is this your kind of pointing to this door looking thing? Is this the direction to your bathroom? And she goes, no, we don't have a public restroom. And I thought, well, that's strange. How do you have food and drinks, but not a bathroom? Even more importantly for the morning coffee crew, what about your evening wine? Huh, interesting. And so I just kind of thought well, that changes the dynamic a little bit. And so she hands me my croissant, she's making coffee, and I had grabbed a little table on the other side of the espresso machine, and she asked me some other questions. So I stood up and I was talking to her while she was making the coffee. And as she handed me my coffee, she's like, well, hope you have a great day. And her energy felt like she was pushing me at the door. And I was like, well, that's odd. I was going to sit and write for a couple hours, but it doesn't feel like she wants me here. And so I sat down because I wanted to really sit with it. And I ate my croissant and then I was like, no, I have to leave. I don't know why, but I have to leave. So I got in my car, drove further into town, went to the public restrooms, and I was like, okay, I kind of closed my eyes a little bit I asked, saying this out loud makes it sound strange, but this is what I do all the time and it always makes sense to me. So tell me if this is strange or not. But I closed my eyes and I asked my future self to show me a scene. And my future self showed me a different coffee shop that was about another mile and a half down the coast. And I was like, okay, so I went there. The scene in my mind was showing me that I was there in the future. So I went, and the interesting thing was I was like, I have this full cup of coffee already. I think that's why it was so confusing to me. So as soon as I park, I actually take the first sip of the coffee. And it was kind of my standard order. I got a latte. It was terrible. And I love coffee. And I feel like it's really hard to mess it up. You can make a really great coffee, but it's really hard to make a terrible coffee. This one was so bad that when I got out of my car, I threw it out after only one sip. And I have never done that before in my life. And I was like, this is interesting. The science part of me was like flashing red lights. We have an experiment on our hands, friends. We need to figure out what is happening. So I walked up to the next coffee shop. This is a coffee shop that I've been to several times before. And there's, of course, a line out the front door because there always is. And as I'm standing there, I notice it has a name of something and something about hours. And I was like, wonder what that is. Oblivious. The guy behind me says, is this no longer Sleepy Monk? And I said, I don't think it is. And I wasn't going to say any names, but that one just snuck out. But I said, I don't think that is. And we both kind of looked at each other and we both kind of looked at the signage. And I was like, yeah, they still have Sleepy Monk coffee. So they must still be roasting Sleepy Monk somewhere. But the coffee shop itself is no longer named Sleepy Monk. It was some other name that I don't remember. So maybe that's the non-direct clue for where I was. So get inside, and you could tell that it was under new management because at Sleepy Monk, they were a well-oiled machine. They had multiple people behind counter, and they were just turning people through this tiny little coffee shop so quickly for the amount of volume of coffee that they were putting out. And this new crew was still working out the kinks. And so it was very interesting because there were a lot of people waiting, which is the only reason why there was a line. I think if it was the original Sleepy Monk crew, it would have been empty, like people sitting out enjoying their coffee, but there would have been no line. And not to say that that's a good thing or a bad thing. It was just an observation because I was in super observer mode after my previous experience. So I get this cute little spot right in the front, and this other gentleman sits down. He's got a very sweet 16-year-old pup who just wants to be petted and get treats. And so I did the petting. I didn't have any treats. And this guy's like, oh, you have a Remarkable. And I was like, yes, I love it. And so we start chatting about writing and the Remarkable and the two different versions of them. And then his wife comes out and I'm chatting with her about being a writer. And it's this great little conversation. I was like, this is exactly where I was meant to be. But of course, my mind is going back to the first place I stopped and asking, why did that happen for me? Because I don't understand. I have never thrown out a coffee in my life, and I've also never felt so unwelcome somewhere in my life. I was having this like playback that felt a little bit like a Pretty Woman moment. You know, the one where she goes shopping on Rodeo Drive and they're like, we don't serve your kind here. And then she comes back and she's like, big mistake. Yeah, I was feeling that. I was feeling that in a big way. So I end up finishing my coffee, I do my writing, and then I was like, "I'm gonna go wander out onto the beach." And so I walk out onto the beach, I'm doing some copy, I'm doing some recording, some B-roll, watching people fly kites, ride bikes, all the things, right? So I'm just hanging out. And as I'm driving home, I'm still thinking about this terrible coffee experience, and I was like, "Why is that just like a mosquito flitting around my head, buzzing my ears? Why?" And I got home and I was like, "I just don't know." I had to sleep on it. And when I woke up this morning, as I was doing my morning pages, I just asked, "Why?" And it all came out onto the page. My intuition told me exactly what was happening and why it was happening. That's when I began to question the impact of energetics on the food and beverages that we consume. And I had a theory. I had a theory that the energetics of the person who is serving you the food or drink impacts, the person who made it, the person who's serving it, impacts the energetics of the whatever it is that you've ordered, and that changes the taste. And I was like, in my head, that makes sense. And then, of course, I went to AI and I was like, pull some research on this. Is this a thing scientifically, right? Is this a thing, or is this just kind of like a knowing that I have? And AI kicked out a scientist that my guess is you've probably heard of, Dr. Masaru Emoto. He's the one who did the water experiments. And if you don't know who he was, what he did was he took different containers of water, and I can't remember if he spoke it or if he wrote it on the container. He may have done both, but he wrote either love, gratitude, joy, hatred, negativity, doesn't belong. He wrote words that had a certain energetic frequency on the containers and then froze the water and looked at the water under microscopes. The water that had positive intentions written on them had these beautiful, symmetrical, snowflake-like formations. The ones that had the negative emotions written on them were there was no pattern to them. They were sharp, they were angled. Imagine if water was angry, right? Angry water looks like the way you would imagine angry water is. And so it was scientific proof that we can project energetics, emotions onto things like water and change the formation of it. And there was another scientific experiment, which I got really curious about, that Dr. Emoto did because I had never heard of this one. And it popped up as something that resonated with my experience that morning even more. He did what was called a rice experiment, where he took 3 containers of cooked rice. The first one, he sent positive intention to, right? Love, gratitude, appreciation. The next one, he sent negative energy towards, can't stand you, you're terrible, blah, 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 negative. And the third one was ignored. The first batch of rice, 30 days later, was still fresh and fragrant. The second container, the one that was negatively impacted, rotted, as you would imagine. The third container, which was the surprise, the one that was ignored, not only did it rot faster than the negative one, it became black mold. Black mold. Ignored, dismissed, no energy given. It deteriorated even faster than the negative attention. And as someone who has struggled with this internal story that she's written for herself that she has seen but not heard, that dismissed container of rice that went bad before even the one that was told it sucked stood out to me. And when I thought back to my cup of coffee and the fact that I felt like she was saying leave, I was like, I was dismissed. No wonder that coffee tasted terrible. And the interesting thing is, I don't know if that was the case at all, right? Her story could have been completely different. But there was part of me that's like, I know some people, some cafe owners don't like when people come in with their laptops because they tie up tables and they don't order more stuff. And so it impacts their revenue. And so my thought was, maybe that's the story she has. Maybe she didn't even realize she was doing it. That's probably the more honest answer. But the thing that I couldn't stop thinking about was the fact that I didn't feel welcome there and my drink tasted terrible because it was created in an environment where I didn't feel welcome. And then when I backed up even more and thought about the fact that every single time I've driven by, it seemed like it was closed, it just made me wonder, is the energetics of this space non-welcoming? Because when I walked in that day, the door was open, but the sign out front said closed. And I remembered seeing the sign and thinking, if that door wasn't open, I would assume it was closed and I would have left. I didn't consciously make that decision. It was an unconscious decision that after I reflected on it, I became aware of. And there's part of me that's like the Pretty Woman moment where I want to go in and be like, here's the cafe and here's where not to go because she doesn't have a bathroom, or so she claims. So she doesn't actually want you to be there. Not very helpful, very spiteful. And there's another part of me that's like, let's just slow down for a second and start paying attention to the energetics of the experiences that we're having and the energetics of what we are putting out into the world, because someone is experiencing us just the way I experienced what I experienced yesterday. And so I'm purposely not saying the name of the cafe because my intention is not to do harm. My intention is to bring to light an experiment for you and I to go on together, where we start to pay a little bit more attention to the energetics of our world consciously, because unconsciously we've been doing this all along. You know, when you go to a restaurant and your waitstaff is in a bad mood, you feel it. One of the things that popped up in some of the research that I was doing is the fact that if your waitstaff is unhappy, it impacts the experience of the food. So this has been proven, and I hesitate to say much more than that because I don't want someone to fact check me. I'm just saying what my experience has been. And what I'm using that to do next is get even closer. I'm going to slow down even more and really start paying attention to the places that I visit. And what about those places, spaces, and people do I find most attractive? An experiment that I haven't told anybody about. So you're hearing it here first. Several weeks ago, I went to a farmer's market, and it was a very busy farmer's market. And I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just wanted to be in the energy of a market and be around people and creativity. And so I made this decision. I was going to intuitively walk through the market. And I used to go on intuitive walks all of the time. They were like one of my favorite things in the world. But essentially it is, I start walking and I follow the push or pull of my body. So if I'm walking and my body says turn right, I turn right. If I'm walking and feel myself kind of veering left, I veer left. But I let my body take me for a walk. And so as I'm walking through this market, I'm walking through the very center of the aisles. And I notice I tend to, feel magnetized by certain booths. And often those booths were very busy. And I was like, this is interesting. Wonder what's happening here that is causing attraction for a lot of people. I would feel myself veer wide around certain booths. And I was always interested because some of those, nobody else was at them. And I was like, I wonder what energetics are there? Like, where are the magnets flipped so that we're actually pushing each other apart rather than together? And so I just wanted to make this episode today because I feel like we're all doing this unconsciously. And I would really love to bring this experiment to the consciousness, to the awake self, to just start noticing and exploring the things that we are experiencing and how they are impacting not only the flavor, but the experience of life. And so over this next week, I want you just to pay attention when you are out about in the world. And I say it's going to work best when you're out about in the world because when you're home, you have a baseline of home. You have a familiarity with home that even uncomfortable stuff that is familiar is acceptable because it's familiar. So your senses are a little turned down because you're so used to the energy of your immediate space. I want you to go places you haven't been before and tune in to how you feel in those places and spaces and around those people, because you're going to notice the variation a little bit more easily. You're just going to sense it more. When I first moved out of Portland 2.5 years ago, I had been living in Portland for 12 years before I moved, and I knew my time in Portland was coming to an end. I moved to 10 acres, about an hour out of the city, and my nervous system has been slowly shifting to a different frequency because I have a lot more spaciousness, because I have a lot more quiet, because I'm no longer living like on edge. And now that my nervous system has quieted down, I can feel the energy field of Portland before I even get to Vancouver. Like it starts to ramp up the energy, the emotional or energetic noise starts to ramp up as I'm coming into Vancouver. But as soon as I get into Portland, it is so loud. And it has changed a little bit over the last 2.5 years. The frequency, the volume has shifted a little bit. I can sense that. But I really can't stay in Portland for more than a couple hours. And I'm okay with that. Portland is a beautiful city. Portland will always have a part of my heart. I have loved Portland for as long as I've lived there, and I will continue to love Portland. It's just not the place that I call home anymore. And it's just so fascinating how you don't notice the vibe of a city until you've left for long enough to realize that there's a different frequency to live in. So as I mentioned, I am going on a experimental journey to start noticing more about the energetics and start paying attention more to the foods that taste really good, the coffees that blow my mind. And I want to tune into that and really see what is it about being in those places that is savory, sensational, delicious for me. So today's episode was quite different than the last one and quite different than where we've been. And so I'm really curious if this sparked something for you, if this created curiosity for you. If you're reading or listening to this on Substack, let me know in the comments if this is an experiment that you're curious about, or if you've had an experience that's similar to mine that you want to share. If you're listening to this on another podcast platform, in the show notes is a link to Substack. So you can still head on over there, subscribe if you want to, but you can leave a comment as well. So thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today. I would love to hear how it landed for you. If you agree or disagree, I'm okay with those as well. And I look forward to seeing you again really soon. Happy experimenting. Thank you for listening to the Lightworker Diaries. If something stirred in you today, take a breath and let it land. To go deeper, you can subscribe to the written diaries on Substack. You'll find a link in the show notes. Until next time, be true to you.